The man at the piano looked nothing like Dean Martin. At least, that's what the crowd at Rosselli's bar wanted to believe. His hair was thinner, grayer. His tuxedo was gone, replaced by a worn cardigan and slacks. The smooth baritone that had seduced America for 40 years now came out raspy, damaged, fighting for every note. But when he opened his mouth to sing, something happened that made every person in that small Italian restaurant in North Hollywood stop mid-conversation. The voice was unmistakable. Broken, yes, but unmistakable. He sang through the standards. Memories are made of this. That's amore. The 17 people scattered among the checkered tablecloths clapped politely, some confused, some beginning to suspect. And then, as the pianist started a melody no one had ever heard before, Dean Martin closed his eyes. In the back corner, sitting alone with a glass of untouched wine, his daughter Deanna started to cry, because she knew what was coming. She knew that her father, who had been given 6 months to live 3 weeks ago, was about to sing the song he'd kept hidden for 38 years, the song that would explain everything. To understand what Dean Martin was doing in that small restaurant on the 18th of February 1993, performing under the name Danny Vitale, you need to understand what his doctors had told him 3 weeks earlier, the news that would change everything and nothing at all. The 28th of January 1993, UCLA Medical Center. Dean Martin sat in the examination room wearing a hospital gown that somehow made him look smaller than his 75 years. Dr. Robert Chen, a pulmonologist who had been treating Dean's emphysema for 2 years, came in holding a manila folder. His face said everything before his mouth opened. Your lung capacity is at 18%, Mr. Martin. The scarring is extensive. The damage is irreversible. Dean nodded slowly. He'd smoked 3 packs a day since he was 15. He knew this was coming. How long? Dr. Chen sat down. 6 months. Maybe 9 if you're lucky. I'm recommending you stop all physical activity. No stairs, no exertion, certainly no performing. Dean looked at the doctor with those heavy-lidded eyes that had charmed the world. So what you're saying is, I should sit in my house and wait to die? That's not what I'm saying. Yes, it is. Dean stood up, the gown falling open at the back. But here's the thing, Doc. I've been dying my whole life. We all have. Some of us just get a memo about it. He dressed slowly, each movement deliberate. His breathing was labored, each inhale a negotiation with damaged tissue. When he walked out to the parking lot, Deanna was waiting. She was his youngest daughter, the one who looked most like him, the one who understood him in ways his 7 other children never could. She saw his face and knew. How bad? 6 months. Dina's hand went to her mouth. Dad, we need to tell everyone. We need to get you into treatment. We need to... Stop, Dean said softly. I don't want treatment. I don't want everyone hovering. I don't want the media circus. I've had enough circuses to last 3 lifetimes. What do you want? Deanna asked, tears already forming. Dean looked out at the Los Angeles skyline, the city that had made him famous and slowly consumed him. I want to sing. Just a little while longer. I want to sing the way I used to. Before the stadiums and the television cameras. I want to sing for people who don't know they're watching Dean Martin. I want to sing something true. What Dean Martin did next was so perfectly him that later, when Deanna would tell the story, people would think she was making it up. He created a plan. A secret, strange, beautiful plan that would occupy his final months and reveal more about who he really was than 50 years of stardom ever had. He would perform in small venues under assumed names, dive bars, Italian restaurants, VFW halls, places where aging singers in cardigans were invisible. He'd sing the standards, the songs people expected, and then he'd close every show with a song no one had ever heard. A song he'd written in 1955, during the height of his partnership with Jerry Lewis, and locked away in a safety deposit box for 38 years. Why did you write it? Deanna asked him the night he explained his plan. They were sitting in his living room on Mountain Drive, the house where he'd hidden from the world for the past 6 years. Because I was happy, Dean said. Genuinely, stupidly happy. And I needed to remember what that felt like. The song is about everything. My childhood, my mother, Jerry, my marriages, my kids, my mistakes, everything I couldn't say out loud. Why didn't you ever release it? Dean lit a cigarette, his hands shaking slightly. Because it was too honest. People didn't want honest Dean Martin. They wanted the drunk act. They wanted the cool guy who didn't care. If I'd released this song, people would have known I cared about everything. They would have seen through the whole act. But now I'm dying. And I figure if there was ever a time to be honest, it's when you've got nothing left to lose. The first performance was the 11th of February 1993 at a place called the Rustic Inn in Burbank. Dean registered under the name Tony Crosetti, his birth name. The booking manager, a woman named Linda Vasquez, barely glanced at him. We got a slot at 9 p.m. on Thursday. $50 plus tips. You know any Sinatra? I know some Sinatra, Dean said with that sleepy smile. That Thursday night, 32 people were scattered across the dark bar. Dean sat at an old upright piano, his breathing shallow, his fingers finding the keys like muscle memory. He opened with, "Ain't that," a kick in the head, and a few people looked up from their beers. The voice was rough, damaged, but there was something in it that made you stop. He sang for 40 minutes. Standards, mostly. Songs he could do in his sleep. And then he paused, took a long drink of water, and said into the microphone, "I'm going to play something I wrote a long time ago. Never performed it before, probably won't again." The melody that came from the piano was haunting. Minor key, slow. Nothing like the bright, swinging numbers Dean Martin was known for. And when he started to sing, his voice cracked on the first line, but he kept going. The song was called "The Man in the Mirror Doesn't Wave Back Anymore." The lyrics were devastating in their simplicity. They talked about a boy in Ohio who learned to be someone else to survive, about becoming funny because it was safer than being real, about loving people from a distance because closeness meant vulnerability, about building a wall so high that even you couldn't climb over it anymore. In the back of the bar, Deanna sat with a tape recorder hidden in her purse. She'd asked her father if she could document the performances. He'd said yes, but only if she never released them while he was alive, and only if she understood that this was for him, not for history. When the song ended, the bar was silent. Not the polite silence of people being respectful, the stunned silence of people who'd just witnessed something raw and unexpected. Then someone started clapping. Slowly at first, then others joined. Dean nodded, stood up with difficulty, and walked out the side door. Linda Vasquez caught Deanna on her way out. "Who is that guy?" "Just a friend of the family," Deanna said. "He's really good. You should tell him to audition for bigger places." "He's not interested in bigger places," Deanna said. And then, because she couldn't help herself, "You have no idea how big he used to be." Over the next 4 months, Dean Martin performed under different names in 17 different venues across Los Angeles. Danny Vitale, Tony Crosetti, Dino Martino, D. Martin. The names were thin disguises, breadcrumbs for anyone paying attention, but no one was paying attention. Old men in cardigans singing in dive bars are invisible in Los Angeles. The city has too many ghosts to notice one more. Each performance followed the same pattern. He'd sing for 45 minutes to an hour, getting shorter as his lungs got worse. The standards first, the safe songs, the ones that required nothing from him emotionally, and then, at the end, the song, the secret song, the one he'd written in 1955. But here's what Deanna noticed as she recorded each performance. The song was changing, slightly, carefully. Each night, Dean would add a verse or alter a lyric. It was like he was writing the final chapter of his autobiography in real time, incorporating his dying into the narrative of his life. On March 15, at a place called Angelo's Pizzeria in Pasadena, he added a verse about his son, about Dean Paul, who died in that plane crash in 1987, about how he'd never recovered from burying his child, about how every day since had been a performance of being alive. The words cut through the small restaurant like a knife. Some people cried. Others looked away, uncomfortable with the raw emotion. Dean sang through it, his eyes closed, his hands finding chords that sounded like grief. After that performance, a man approached Deanna. "I know who he is," the man said. His name was Robert Castellano. He was 68, a retired music producer. "I saw Dean Martin at the Sands in 1964. That's him, isn't it?" Dina hesitated. "Please," Robert said. "I'm not going to say anything. I just want to understand. Why is he doing this?" "Because he's dying," Deanna said simply. "And this is how he wants to go out, singing something true." Robert Castellano came to 3 more performances. Each time, he sat in the back and cried. After the last one, he wrote Deanna a letter. "I spent 40 years in the music business," he wrote. "I've heard every great singer of the last century. What your father is doing in these small rooms is more honest and more beautiful than anything I've heard in a stadium. He's giving people a gift. I hope he knows that." By May, Dean was struggling. His breathing was worse. He needed oxygen before and after performances. He'd lost 30 pounds. His daughter Deanna begged him to stop, to rest, to let her take care of him. But Dean refused. "I've got maybe a month left," he told her. "Maybe less. I need to finish the song." Because the song still wasn't complete, there was one verse missing. The final verse. The one about the end. On the 12th of June, 1993, Dean Martin performed at Rosselli's Bar in North Hollywood for what would be his last time. He'd chosen the venue deliberately. It was owned by a distant cousin, Tony Rosselli, who'd known Dean as Dino Crosetti back in Steubenville, who remembered the kid before the fame. The place was tiny, 20 tables, a bar with 8 stools, a piano that was slightly out of tune. Dean arrived at 7 p.m., 2 hours early. Tony helped him set up, noticing how much effort it took Dean to walk from the door to the piano. "You okay, Dino?" Tony asked, using the old name. "Yeah," Dean said. "I'm good. This is the last one, you know." Tony nodded. "I figured. You want me to tell people?" "No," Dean said. "Just let it be what it is. A guy singing in a bar." At 9 p.m., Dean started playing. 17 people in the audience. Dina in the back with her tape recorder, tears already streaming down her face because she knew this was goodbye. Dean sang through his set. His voice was barely there, more air than sound, but the emotion in it was undeniable. Every song felt like a farewell. Every note was a fight. And then he paused, took a long drink of water, and said into the microphone, "I want to thank you for listening tonight. I'm going to play a song I wrote a long time ago. I've been finishing it these past few months. Tonight, I think it's finally done." The final verse he added that night was about mortality, about looking back on a life of performance and wondering which parts were real, about regret and gratitude existing in the same breath, about loving imperfectly but genuinely, about dying as the final honest act. When he sang the last line, the man in the mirror finally waves back, "Because there's nothing left to hide." His voice broke completely. He sat at the piano, his head down, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The room was absolutely silent. And then, from the back, Deanna started clapping. Through her tears, she clapped. And one by one, every person in that small Italian restaurant stood up and applauded. Some were crying. Some didn't understand why they were so moved, but everyone felt it. The moment when a legend stopped being a legend and became just a man telling the truth. Dean didn't stand for a bow. He just nodded, tears on his face, and walked slowly toward the door. Tony Rosselli met him there, hugging him carefully. "You did good, Dino," Tony whispered. "You did real good." Dean Martin died on the 25th of December 1995, 2.5 years after doctors gave him 6 months. He'd outlived his prognosis, but those who knew him said he'd really died that night in June 1993, performing for 17 people under a fake name. Everything after was just an epilogue. After his death, Diana compiled the recordings of all 17 performances. She had the song analyzed by musicologists who traced its evolution over 4 months. What they found was remarkable. The song wasn't just about Dean Martin's life. It was about the universal experience of hiding who you really are, of building a persona so convincing that you forget there's a person underneath, of spending a lifetime entertaining everyone except yourself. The verses Dean added in those final performances revealed things he'd never spoken about publicly: his complicated relationship with his parents, his guilt over the end of his partnership with Jerry Lewis, his failed marriages and the ways he'd emotionally abandoned his children, his fear of intimacy, his addiction to applause as a substitute for genuine connection, his grief over his son's death that had consumed his final 8 years. But the song also revealed something else: gratitude. For the music, for the laughter, for the brief moments of genuine connection that broke through the performance. For his children, especially Diana, who'd understood him when understanding wasn't easy. For the audience members in those small venues who'd received the gift of his final, honest performances. In 1997, Diana released a compilation of the recordings as an album called The Man in the Mirror. It sold modestly. Critics called it a haunting epilogue to a legendary career, and the most vulnerable Dean Martin ever allowed himself to be. The song itself became a cult classic among serious music fans, studied in colleges as an example of autobiographical songwriting at its most raw. But for Diana, the recordings were something more personal. They were proof that her father, in his final months, had found a way to be authentic. That the man who'd spent 50 years playing cool, detached, unbothered, had finally let the mask slip. That Dean Martin, underneath all the performance, had been human all along, scared and loving, and hurt, and grateful, and real. There's a recording that Diana keeps private, never released, never shared. It's from after that final performance at Rosselli's. The tape kept running as Dean sat in his car in the parking lot, trying to catch his breath. You can hear him crying, not the silent tears of the performance, but deep, wrenching sobs. And between the sobs, you can hear him laughing, because that was Dean Martin. Grief and joy so tangled together, they became the same thing. And then, very quietly, you hear him say, "I did it. I finally told the truth." That recording lasts 3 minutes and 42 seconds. It's the most important 3 minutes and 42 seconds in Dean Martin's entire catalog. Not because of the quality of the singing or the wit of the performance, but because it's the sound of a man who spent his entire life hiding, finally allowing himself to be seen. Dean Martin once said that the key to success in show business was to never let them see you sweat. He perfected that philosophy, becoming the coolest man in the world by never appearing to care about anything. But in those final performances, singing to handfuls of strangers in bars that smelled like stale beer and marinara sauce, he broke his own rule. He let them see him sweat. He let them see him cry. He let them see him as he really was. And in doing so, he gave his audience something far more valuable than entertainment. He gave them permission. Permission to be imperfect. Permission to hide, and then, when the time is right, permission to reveal. Permission to spend a lifetime building walls, and then, at the end, permission to tear them down. The man in the mirror doesn't wave back anymore, unless you're brave enough to be real, unless you're willing to sing the song you've been hiding, unless you understand that the final act of a life well lived isn't the performance, it's the moment you stop performing and just be. Dean Martin figured that out with 6 months to live. He spent those final months singing the truth in dive bars to strangers who would never know they'd witnessed the king of cool finally getting warm. And in those small, forgotten rooms, Dean Martin became more legendary than he'd ever been on the biggest stages in the world. Because legends are built on mystery and distance. But legacy is built on truth. And in the end, Dean Martin chose legacy.